You're on.
My name is Emily Gordon. I'd like to talk about, don't do that, you screwed me. My name is Emily Gordon. I'd like to talk about the experiences I had starting a foundation in the middle of an AIDS crisis, and the foundation was about children who were HIV positive and their caretakers, and it was from an activist standpoint. The way I thought about doing this is I had several friends when I lived in New York who were HIV positive, and I had joined a group called ACT UP, AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power. And in one of my attorney friends, it really empowered me because everybody was so overwhelmed and there were no drugs, and AZT hadn't even been talked about at that point. So I was working with the health department, and I got an assignment to go to someone's house and talk to this grandmother about the child she was caring for because she needed a lot of support. And I found out that the hospital she was taking her grandchild to was basically telling her, he's not going to live past 2 years old, so I don't know why you want all these extra things like nutrition and a social worker to talk to. We can't provide that. So the health department in New York started a unit, and I was it. And I had another person that did some of the documentation. And I went out and I said, tell me about Bronx, Lebanon. And she said, well, for one thing, I've never done drugs and I don't ever want to do drugs, but in order to get to the clinic they have for the children, it's in the basement and we have to walk through the methadone clinic. And, I take my 10-year-old with us, when we do this hospital trip, and she's very upset about looking at the people that are there. And I said, that's really scaring me because Dr. Wiesny is a great doctor, and I don't think he looks at it from a a patient standpoint. He just looks at it, well, they gave me space and now I'm starting this program. So what happened is I was meeting more and more grandparents, foster parents, and natural parents who had HIV positive children. And I've always been an activist, so I asked them could they possibly come to a group, and we could share information with each other because there was information lacking. And they started saying something to the effect of, why don't we start a real nonprofit, because the only thing we have is this thing called Gay Men's Health Crisis. And we live in the Bronx and Queens and Staten Island, and we do not want to drag our children down to something that says Gay Men's Health Crisis. And if we tell our family members we're going down there, we'll be scorned, and we'll try to have to explain to the kids why so many people are dying and why are they grown and what did they do. And some of the kids are pretty smart and they read. So we started having monthly meetings. One of the parents whose wife was positive, he was positive, and his 13-year-old son was positive, he asked me about how to get a bar mitzvah for his son, because it is where they attended church. They had already told him, we're not so sure we even want Stan coming in, And I said, well, it's kind of out of my realm of knowledge, but I'll look around and try to support you, Roger, as much as I can. During that time, his wife died, so it was just him and his son.
Can you explain to me, you had church and bar mitzvah. Can you tell me how church don't normally have bar mitzvahs
we were looking for any location that would allow a bar mitzvah for his son.
What's the location of it?
Yeah, it was because he was already told by where they practiced their faith that this isn't going to happen. They didn't want anyone to know that his son was HIV positive, even though Magdalena just died and Roger was positive and his son Stan was positive.
Was it the rabbi would not perform
They said they had a board meeting and no one wanted this attention brought on their place of worship.
They didn't want the bar mitzvah to take place there. But in order to have bar mitzvah, you also need some support.
I know.
And that was also
let's see what I
want to hear that. That's okay.
So what happened is we found sort of a non-denominational church, and he got someone to give classes to his son, because there's a lot that you have to do for that. And it sounds really weird at the time, but that was like a real success for this group, because during the time we were talking about Roger's bar mitzvah, things like that, and Magdalena just dying, one of the mothers that was a grandmother said, she said, "Oh God, Emily, I've got the same problem, and I didn't want to tell anybody about it. I'm black, and I've been going to a black church with my granddaughter for about 2 years now, and the minister came up the other day and said, I've heard rumors that she's got the virus." And she said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, from now on, I don't want her attending any Sunday school classes. We're going to allow her to go to the main services, and if the congregation gets any more upset than they currently are, you may have to change churches." So there was a lot of discrimination going on.
What year was this?
This was a period of time from 1983 all the way till 1993. And what they did in Harlem, because there was a lot of problems with the black community in Harlem and AIDS, all the organists were dying, but they sort of let them play the organ because they were openly gay, but they figured this was a trade-off. But then when Donald died, what did he die of, and are we going to have a funeral? They hired a social worker just to work with the black community, and she was, of course, happily enough black. But she had a very hard time. She tried to get all those churches together and talk about what's happening in your community. And there was so much fear that we went to Harlem one time and we handed out leaflets, and most people wouldn't touch the leaflets because they said, "This is how you get the virus."
Well, did you see things change over the years as more knowledge came by? Or did they still
Very,
go with the
very,
rules?
very slowly. What happened is I had a meeting place in the Gay and Lesbian Center on 13th Street in Manhattan for my group. Interestingly enough, we chose Sunday at 2 o'clock. And the first time we had the meeting, I was waiting outside. This is like 3-story building, and they had rooms, and this is where ACT UP met for several years. What happened is this flood of people came out, and I said, "What was at the big room?" "Oh, that's the Alcoholic Anonymous group, Emily." And the parents, one of them said, "I should be going to that." And I said, "No, we're going to do this right now." After we had a group going and we started a newsletter and we got permission to have some parties like Christmas parties and things like that, the next thing that happened was I sort of took on ACT UP because ACT UP had a lot of money within that group. They started out with maybe 40 or 50 people, and they got up to several hundred. And they were going to conferences, international conferences. And my parents and caregivers didn't know there was an international conference. So I had one of the mothers who also was in the same situation, mother, father, and daughter, and that's when we can introduce a picture, because I've got some good pictures of Kia. And she was half black and half Indian, and so the mother was sort of caught up in all of that. What happened is Kia's mother came, and she waited until 11 o'clock, and she lived in the Bronx, and she was on the trains. But we got up and we made a presentation. She was the only mother who could come at that hour downtown. And we said, "We want some money so we can go to the conference in Amsterdam." And someone said, "Well, why aren't you staying in the States? Why aren't you going to the pediatric AIDS conferences?" And I said, "I'm sorry, I hadn't heard about them because I was doing so much other stuff at that time and I was working full time." And they said, "Well, as long as none of the parents tell me," and this came from the group in different ways, "that my child is innocent and you're guilty because you have the virus and you had that nasty sex." I said, "My parents are past that. They're out there in the ghetto surviving with kids, and everybody is rejecting them. In fact, one of the best parents took in 3 HIV positive kids, and her children who had left the house came back and they had a fit. And they said, 'You're going to lose your housing. You're in the projects in the Bronx. The word's going to get out. You're going to be thrown out, Mommy. Why are you doing this?' She said, 'Because there's a need.' And one of the agencies contacted her and said, 'We've heard you're very good with kids. Would you be willing to take a foster kid?' She took 3. One was 11, one was 7, and one was 6. The 7-year-old and the 6-year-old died the next year. And I've got some funeral pictures from that I'd like to sort of put in, because It was very hard for the other parents to go to that funeral, but they were so supportive. Since I wasn't raising children and chose not to have children, lots of times I'd get midnight phone call about what to do about this and that, and I made the group strong enough so that they worked with each other, and I would say, I'm not a parent, but I think you need to call Jackie, or you need to call Rhonda, you need to call the other parents and get some of this medical things, and navigating the medical system is very important. I took 4 parents to DC before I took them to Amsterdam. It was so funny because as an activist, the way we went to medical conferences is they would have all their little programs, and we understood most of them by then. And the group had been formed for about 3 years by then. And what happened was we had strategy meetings in the evening after we ate and, went to the conference. And I told my parents that were with me, I said, I'll come by about 7 o'clock and we'll go down to one of the rooms that the hotel has and we'll have a strategy meeting because we just got here. And this mother looked at me and she said, Emily, I'm in a hotel room alone. My daughter is home. I haven't been in a hotel room ever in my whole life. You want me to leave the hotel room and go to a meeting? No, we're not going. Two other ones said the same thing. I said, okay, I understand that. And when I went to visit the foster mother, Renelle, she said, nobody even has my phone number. Do you realize I can take a bath by myself without the phone ringing and the kids beating in the door? What kind of life have you lived? And I said, well, obviously I haven't raised, she had 4 kids previously, and then she took in the 3 boys. I haven't raised kids like that. But what happened was the doctors from the same hospitals where the kids were would come to me and they would say, Emily, are you with those Lydia over there? And I'd say, yes. And he said, she's so intelligent. I was wondering, what hospital did she go to? And I said, gee, Dr. Wiesner, that's funny because she goes to your hospital, And she was only too happy to be on committees and to work with the hospital. What had happened with the parents is they signed waivers, and it's supposed to be informed consent if you're going to do a trial. And they had this drug called IVIG that they wanted to give the kids. There was no informed consent. They came in, went through the methadone clinic, went to this much smaller clinic, and a social worker came and said, I'm going to save your child's life, sign this. And they signed, and half of them got the drug and half of them didn't. But they didn't understand that because the hospital figured, bottom line, they're going to die by 2 years old, and some of the adults seem to be living a little bit longer.
What was your official status at the time? Who was employing you?
Health department. I was the school review panel because they had so many problems. All the schools in 5 boroughs from New York City Department of Health.
How many women were in the group? Were there any men in the group?
2. Roger and one other one who was separated from his wife, and there was a lot of conflict about whether he should come in because he hadn't told her he was HIV positive and he had just gotten out of jail. And I ran into that a lot. I tried to track down people that had just gotten out of jail because that's how the mother got the virus. And I would separately try to track them down, and I would say, you need to get tested because you have the virus, and your girlfriend and your daughter are both ill now because it was maternal transmission. And he said, no, she was a whore. She must have fucked somebody else. It wasn't me, and no, I'm not taking any tests and get out of my life. I got to go to the clinic now. It was a very hard thing. I had a girl who had a 6-year-old, and I was working at Covenant House when I first met her. She had a 6-year-old daughter, and she had a newborn. The 6-year-old daughter she had when she was 14. The parents were so upset that she had done that they were sort of keeping her from having any kind of plans for living independently and, getting an apartment or anything like that. But then she had the baby, and the baby came up positive. And then the mother said, you've got to get out of my house. I refuse to have you here. I mean, I told you you're going out with a jailbird to begin with. What did you expect? And she said, I expected you to help me all along get an apartment, and we got her an apartment. And she was set up, but we couldn't stop the inevitable. And she found out that she was positive through the baby. because they weren't testing her. Questions?
Now, how many people were in the group?
At times between when we had our major events, like we had park events and holiday events and lectures, and we went all over the boroughs doing community outreach, 60 to 70. For the regular meetings, maybe 20 to 25. I had to go to the hospital and sit with this one little boy, and I have a fabulous picture of him, because his mother was HIV positive and she had herpes at that time, and the hospital wouldn't allow her to be in there. Now he had 2 other teenage brothers, but they were completely freaked out because my dad just died, and now the mother, is sick, and he's going to die too. And so I had to go and sit in the hospital all night.
And how many of the members of the group were themselves HIV positive?
I had almost an equal number of foster parents as well as natural parents with me. The thing that upset me greatest was there were 3 people that were dying, the mother, the father, and the child eventually. The thing that helped me the greatest is a couple of kids that had leukemia, the parents joined in. Ryan White's mother would never come to meetings, but they did join in, and they were sort of like in the burbs, and they would come down, and they had more of a college education, and they would, be able to negotiate some of the medical stuff. When we first did our first pediatric conference, I opened the door, and the thing was already in progress, and I said, "Come on, Renelle, sit here. Come on, sit here." And it was all a dark room with doctors asking questions, and they were looking at me like, this is what I came to DC for? I don't understand a word of what they're saying. Is this what our doctors do when we're all dying? They go away and hide in dark rooms and give papers and things? We wrote a paper. I presented a paper at the next...
What was the content of the paper? What was the focus of the paper?
The focus was more on discrimination for HIV-positive children and their families, foster and natural. What happened was we did 2 international conferences, and that's a whole other story about taking some people that are ill through several countries to get to where they need to be. And I had some Spanish-speaking parents, and they said, "Oh, we get to go to Italy. It's Spanish and Italian is so similar. It'll be so easy, to work with us." And it wasn't. We had horrible times. We missed a train because one of the mothers had forgotten her medication, and so she was borrowing some from someone else, and she couldn't find water, and the train was leaving, and I was losing my mind at that point because I didn't think we'd even make the conference, because the parents that were able to come, we got $10,000 from an independent donor, and we had a really good treasurer. And every one of the parents who were very poor and had been poor all their life for the most part had a better idea as to how they're going to spend that $10,000, and the treasurer just quit. Roger wrote a grant. His first thoughts were, "Well, why don't you write grants, Emily?" I said, "Roger, you're educated. You can write a grant." I said, "Where would you write it?" He said, "Magic Johnson." It came this thick. They wanted 5 years of your bank records. We've been in existence for 2 years. We were just doing it on wherever pennies we could get.
How long did
get
the program last?
Follow through what you said. Did you get anything from Magic Johnson?
We never submitted the proposal. It was over our heads.
Are you still in touch with anybody from that era?
I have been interviewed by ACT UP a couple of years ago. They came down. ACT UP is refocusing. There was an East Coast, West Coast thing. But what I was most proud of with Just Kids Foundation was that the people that volunteered to be on the board were not social workers and doctors. They were the parents. So I had a Latina, I had a black mother, I had a suburbanite mother, and it really worked, because I had such diversity of people desperate to get on the board to do more.
Now, what happened? What was the reaction of people as the children died?
That was one of the hardest things I had to do, because either there were some parents that didn't come that I was working with from the health department. You have to find out how the family deals with death. Some families just hide it, and some families are very open about it. So one of the funerals I went to, This boy was 12 and his mother had just died. It was split right down the middle. And the grandmother came to me and she said, "That's the father's side, you're never going to mention AIDS. And this is the mother's side over here, it's okay to mention AIDS. Are you going to go with us to the cemetery?" I said, "Yes, but I hope to God they don't move because I don't want to make it anything worse than what it was." And it was very difficult.
Did you ever try to get volunteers to come and assist you?
Oh, yes. We got space in GMHC for our parties, and we got some food and some presents from them. I got Santa Clauses. And the Santa Claus thing was really weird because I had mothers of considerable weight sitting on Santa's lap. You know, they would take the baby and they would say, "Santa!" And the guy would go, you know, and I saw that they were about going to collapse. I said, "We have to stop. Santa will be back. Please go in the men's room." Because I think we did a wonderful thing. There were a lot of gay guys in ACT UP that really did save lives because they turned their desperation to live into a medical focus and they understood it themselves. It was great, you know. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, I had my friend Michael, who was a lawyer, and he was getting sick, and he was one of those kill me or cure me people. And I went to a conference that they had finally they had a conference on AIDS with a community person who gave a presentation at the end. The prison people came, and it was all social work types. And this one woman said, "How do you handle sex in prison?" The guy said, "There is no sex in prison. Where did you even think about that?" And she said, "Well, I'm sorry, I'm a social worker, and I know that there's sex going on in prison. I worked for prisons." And then the guy said, "Well, you can't use condoms because they'll use it as weapons." And she said, "For what?" "Well, they could fill them with sand and hit us with them." It was surreal. It was totally, I felt almost schizophrenic at that time. It was very surreal. But what happened at the end, Griffin Gold, who was a member of People with AIDS Coalition, who was HIV positive, showed up with his leather jacket and his attitude, and he said, "I'm so glad that I get to talk to him." We had been there all day and we were ready to collapse because it was so intense. He said, "I want to tell you about People with AIDS Coalition. I'm a proud gay person. I'm a proud person living with AIDS. My organization is dedicated to taking people that are living with AIDS and educating them and giving them a place. And yes, I have an office. And yes, I'd love to talk to some of you professionals." I really had a moment where I said, thank God, because I was wondering how much longer I could walk that line between what I was looking at with the parents and what I was looking at with the medical establishment.
Did you do a lot in educational prevention?
We tried. It was very hard to go into communities and say, "At the Bronx Community Center, we're having a meeting on pediatric AIDS." And people that were closeted, and they were closeted, you know, went, "Oh, that might be interesting, but I'm sure as hell not going to meet my neighbors and let them know that my son is positive and so am I." We did do I thought, some very good things. We did more at the International Conference and the Pediatric Conference. And what bothered me greater than anything else, as things were sort of winding down, and sort of, was I thought about getting my PhD here. I had never wanted a PhD. I was always the on-site social worker who does home visits, you know. And I called UNC School of Social Work, and I thought they were I was reading NASW magazine, and I thought they were just going to say, "Oh, you're interested in our program, we'll mail you information." Instead, I got a temp. And the temp said, "Oh, I have no idea what to do with this call." And I said, "Well, surely there's somebody that does." So I got this woman, and she must have been a professor, and I forgot her name, but I was trying to run out the door to go to my job. And she said, "Really? You want to join the program here? What would you write your PhD on?" I'm like, "Excuse me? Is she insane?" You know, I would take a long time to get that PhD. And I had taught previously. And I said, well, I'm currently working with HIV and AIDS. Oh, we don't have that here. I said, I begged.
Oh, that's ridiculous because.
Yeah, that was a
I mean,
professor.
No. I mean, because we've been here a long time. We've
Yeah.
been here since the AIDS crisis began.
Yeah.
And Charles Vanderhorst was one of the most outspoken
Sure.
leaders in the AIDS crisis right from the start.
And it was all I could do to not scream
His
at her.
articles were in the paper all the
Yeah, it was all I could do to keep from screaming at her. And I said, I'm sorry, I go to...
But he probably was in the medical school, and you were talking to the
Yeah,
social work,
yeah.
school of social work.
Yeah, well, that as a social worker is usually pretty proud of her profession. That was kind of weird. But what happened was I said, excuse me, I'm a little confused. I go to international conferences and national conferences, and I've met people from Durham, so I guess there is HIV positive children down in North Carolina. And she said, well, I wouldn't know about that. I'm waiting for her to say the magic words, give me your address. She finally said them because we were having pregnant pauses on the phone conversation. I was looking at my watch because I had to go to work. So finally she said, give me your address. 6 weeks later, I got some information, and by then I'd already decided I'm not even going near the School of Social Work. I will not prostitute my values and my concerns in a group of people that are just idiots. And they had a hard time.
Question, how did it what finally happened? How did it end? Or did it continue when you left?
No, it didn't continue. It didn't continue. Parents were trying to make it continue, but they didn't have the skills, and I was exhausted. You know, we had some kids. I have a 45-year-old kid that is graduated college, got married, had a baby. You know, and Carol, his mother, just couldn't imagine any of that happening. She thought he was going to die as he was a teenager, and the biggest issue she had is, please God, don't let Joey give somebody the virus. There was a doctor that disagreed with me because when they finally said that maybe they can stop the transmission if the mother takes AZT, you know, the parents frequently saw it as, oh great, they're going to give us poison, we're not dying fast enough, because it took forever to get any kind of drugs for children. That was the thing that ACT UP finally figured out. The adults in ACT UP were all getting drugs, and some of them were living. I mean, we had people show up at meetings and say, I've got one T cell left. My name is Peter Straley. I've got one T cell left. I call him Herb. I'd like to live. Does anybody got any ideas? You know, and there was this deathly silence in the group. The only people in ACT UP that weren't positive were me and some of the lesbians, and the lesbians were having sex with the gay guys. And that was kind of, you know, upsetting to the parents who didn't go to that many at nighttime meetings.
So, how did that group end? What happened?
Michelle Lopez, one of the parents who got a job at Bronx AIDS Services, wanted it to continue. 3 kids died from the board. One of the mothers moved, another mother moved. So I left it at the point where I just said, look guys, I've done everything I could. I wasn't able to get the money I fantasized about, and so I could do more. I have to leave. You know, I'm getting older myself and it's time. And it just faded away. And I wrote to IRS and said, I'm no longer in charge, you know.
So you were still employed by New York?
What I had done was something very stupid, but I've not been the only time I've ever done stupid things. I had worked for the city for maybe 15 years in a couple of agencies. I got tired of going on the subways. I found a job that was in the village that was paid about the same, and it was working with seniors, and I could walk to work. So I took the job.
And you quit?
I quit, and guess what? They lost their funding that year. So I called, you know, Department of Health, and I said, I have to ask you a question. Does anybody ever leave this organization and then want to come back? And she said, yeah, we've had that, Ms. Gordon. And I said, well, could I possibly do that? And they said, let me pull your person. No, you've been gone 5 months. The thing is 4 months. Didn't anybody tell you that in your exit interview?
Let's hold here.
Please.
Yeah,
I'm dying.
Perfect, go ahead.
You figured that. ACT UP accepted our group as part of their group, and there wasn't one single gay person in my group, that, could openly say they were gay. They had some that said they'd be willing to try it because they hadn't had sex for a while, but
Next picture. See if we put right where the other one was.
these are some of the kids that were at a party. And I thought they had all been members. This one and this one and this one are all positive, and that's her sister there.
Okay. Next one.
We had really nice parties, and they loved it a lot. This was pictures that was taken at a funeral.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. This was a picture that was taken at a funeral because the kids separated from the funeral and they wanted to stay together, and they decorated their face to show that they were part of the funeral. This is a typical ACT UP picture, and this one and this one and this one. These three women were part of the group. This is when we demonstrated at George Bush's house, and this is from a party, and both these kids are HIV positive. The mother is HIV positive. This was Roger's son, who did get his bar mitzvah.
Move it a little bit. There's a glare right on his face. No, that picture. I want that picture, but put it down someplace else where I can get my picture. Fine. Who is this?
This is Roger's son, who did get his bar mitzvah, and that was one of the kids that came to it. And this is where we were educating the kids at one of the meetings that we had at GMHC, and
Straight down a
that's,
little bit. Turn it. Rotate. No.
what am I
Sorry.
doing? Putting this down here?
Sorry.
We had someone who was educating kids, and the kids were fascinated because there was too much of this sneaking around, we're talking about you, but we're really not talking about you. So they were really happy to come and listen to her, and this is one of our most active parents.
Put it in the same configuration the other one was at. That way.
I'm really not sure what you want me to do right now.
Doing fine.
Yeah, they will throw
Next
you.
one.
This child was adopted, and the mother had just recently married a man that had left the priesthood. And she made sure that she didn't want him to know he was positive, but I visited them. They were in Westchester at the time,
Yes.
but they wanted me to come. This is Roger.
Put it there. I can't see it.
I'm
Please
sorry.
put it there.
This is Roger, who's HIV positive shortly after his wife died, and this was from the bar mitzvah. This is Dennis.
Why is he left? He turned on his side.
Where is-
Why is he dead? Oh, he's in a
He's in a coffin.
This is the child?
Yeah. He was one of the, remember I told you that she adopted, she foster parented two that died the first year, and the older one lived, but he ended up in jail. This was a picture of one of my good friends who, her daughter was HIV positive, and she loved that picture more than anything else because she told me, she says, I feel like a person. I don't feel like I got to go to the doctor. I get to have fun. I get to be a beautiful kid. And this was taken with me trying to educate people about the virus. This was me demonstrating in New York, and I stayed with one of the mothers last time I went to New York, and we had demonstrations going on. This is Phyllis's daughter in front of my house. Not doing this right. This is Phyllis's daughter in front of my house. She told me when we went to DC, she said, Emily, I really like this demonstrating thing. I think I'm going to put my kids in combat fatigues and we're going to all the demonstrations. I said, works for me if it works with the kids. This is just me liking ACT UP because our theme was silence equals death. Am I going too fast?
Nope, you're fine.
Great. This is a good friend of mine who has now lived 27 years with the virus, and he and his lover and I demonstrated in DC, and his lover is negative, and so they had a very difficult relationship going on in terms of sex and things along that line. These are some of my kids, and they love the stage. They were really into the stage, you know, and it worked for them very well. These are some of my board members. That's People with AIDS place, and this is our sign with our pictures.
One question I
Yeah.
don't think I asked you is how long the program lasted?
Almost 10 years.
Almost 10 years.
But it was kind of me, you know. And I read something that said sometimes when you start a nonprofit, this is Naomi's son.
Which is you?
I wasn't
wall?
there. No, this is board members,
Who are you?
and this is her son right here, Naomi.
That's you.
This is Roger. And shortly after his wife died, he got money and he ended up
Oh, you tipped over like
getting.
that.
I'm sorry.
No problem.
I'm sorry.
See? That's Roger?
Yeah.
I don't see him. Yeah. Right.
These are the kids that attended our parties.
Well, just kids are blocked up. The boards are blocked.
Oh, it sure is. Trying to fit Just Kids Foundation on a sign is very bad. You asked me about what I did. This is a picture of the thing that I'm sorry. I'm not multitasking very well today. This is a picture of me at one of the conferences, lack of access to life-saving treatments. And I was pretty much talking about this. I think, I don't want to.
So ACT UP paid for your
Oh, yeah.
attendances at the
Yeah,
conference?
yeah.
Finish this up.
So
sorry.
although your
Wait.
agency itself didn't get.
We didn't have any
funding,
money.
You did have money. You did
We
have
had that
money
little
from
pitiful 10,000 and a few couple hundred here and there,
Yeah.
you know. This was an evening show that we went to, and I had my favorite vest, which strangely enough was all kids. And this was taken at a fundraiser where we had a swimming contest. And this was about 6 years into the organization where Roger was doing quite well. And this is Phyllis's daughter again. And she was just so full of life. She really was.
Does she have HIV?
Yep. She's still alive, too. How's that for a miracle? Her mother's dead, but she's alive. This is me at Republican.
tipped to
I'm
one side.
sorry. This is me at the Republican convention, and I met this guy that was a friend of mine. And what happened is, we got in a Ferris wheel, and he pulled his pants down at the top of the Ferris wheel so he could moon the Republicans. And I kept thinking, you're going to get us in jail, Stephen, for Christ's sake, don't do things like that. He said, well, aren't you upset with the Republicans? I said, I'm upset with everybody at this point. This is a boy that died. That was Lydia's son. I don't know where he got the gun from, but I thought it was kind of significant because he chose to have that picture taken like that, and his mother, I'm pretty sure it wasn't loaded. This is the daughter of one of our somewhat reluctant people because someone told her, you should get away from those activists and we can put you and your child, that was just one daughter that she had, all over television and you can make money. So she came right around to me and said, "You're not giving me any money. Why wouldn't I do this?" This was from a trip to Washington, and these were kids that had died in Queens, and they made those on the quilt. This is Renelle, the foster mother who took in 3 kids. I think the hardest thing
Who's
for
Renelle?
her.
I'm sorry, which one is Renelle?
She's a foster. Oh, right
Which
here.
one? Point to her. That's one. Okay.
She really took to activism, but she got older and she moved to Baltimore, and that sort of, when the last one ended up in jail. And she said, well, think positively, you live long enough to go to jail. That's me at a conference. These are people that wanted to join but never came back. And it says, you know, the prices are killing you, etc., etc. This is Naomi's partner, and he's the father of this little boy, but he only made one visit to us. This is Betty and her daughter. She was a new member, but her daughter died really fast. This is Robert, who ended up in jail, and he ended up dying, but they were just being typical teenagers at that point.
What did they go to jail for?
To be honest, I forgot. Well, you know, they lived in the Bronx in a crappy neighborhood, so it's probably had something to do with pilfering. This is Carol DiPaolo.
I can't see it at the time.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is Carol DiPaolo, who was one of the Long Island women, and she was on the board, and she was really great. And
Which one, the one in red?
yeah, and her son had gotten through transmission, but she and her husband ended up divorcing. This was one of my favorite things. And the little boy that had the gate had the gun also. Someone gave him that poster, and he begged me to take a picture of him. Hate is not a cure. And this is one of our restaurant parties that we had.
What's that in front? What's that picture? Sculpture? What is that?
Where? Here?
What is that?
Oh, this down here?
What is that thing?
Oh, it was a present.
Okay.
It was in cellophane. People were very, very concerned about housing, you know, and getting somewhere safe. And so when we did the Bush House thing, they did that. This is Renelle with Naomi's daughter. There was a Brooklyn Pediatric AIDS Network that was run by a social service agency, and they didn't really want to associate with us, but some of them came to presentations. Someone gave me this card, and I said, why are you giving me this card? Babies for sale, $6.50. She said, isn't that kind of where we're coming from right now? You know, we have
two
just,
for sale? Did you get two, you get cheaper, you discount?
that's a good
Two at
question.
$12?
Yeah, maybe. Look at how they said it. They were she liked it because they were diversified. This is Kia and getting into her Indian period.
Mm-hmm.
And this is me when I first started with him. If I don't get some water soon, I'll